Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. Today I have for you 12 classic novellas that everyone should read. And as an introduction I thought I would address three questions. Why 12, why classic, and why novellas? So let's look at the first one. Why 12? Okay, most of the time when people give you a list, they give you a top 10, right? Well, I'm giving you a top 12, so I'm giving you two extras here. You're welcome. Seriously, the good thing about having 12 is that you can do a year of novellas with this list that I'm going to share with you. And I'm hoping that is what you'll do. You could also turn this into a book club or something. I don't know, I'm just throwing ideas at you. Why classical? Or, Jorge, what do you mean by classical, right? This is a very broad definition that means very different things to different people. I'm afraid the answer is going to be rather arbitrary. I'm going to be looking at texts that were published before 1922. 1922 because it is generally considered to be the year of the birth of modernism. I know that is completely arbitrary, but I have to set some kind of a frame here, some kind of a parameter as to what texts I'm going to be looking at. And I decided on that. And then finally, why novellas, right? Well, I love novellas. Mostly because they are so easy to manage. They are so easy to deal with. And at the same time, they have so much to offer. I think this is the perfect genre in our time because most people, at least most people that I know, including myself, do not have as much time to read as they would like to have. So if you have manageable texts like novellas, you can get a lot out of them. And, you know, it's just a perfect option for our crazy times. I'm not going to go into details in this introduction as to what the novella entails as a genre, because that would take forever. I could speak about the novella for hours, literally. But what I am going to say is this. A novella is not just a longish short story, and it is not just a short novel. Okay, a novella is something completely different from those two. It's something, yes, in the middle, in a way, but you recognize novellas by their structure and also by their narrative purposes. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the list right now and cut the prolegomena right here, because otherwise I'm going to keep talking and talking and we're never going to get to the list. And as I talk about these novellas, I'm going to give you ideas of features of the novella as a genre, so you can put everything together yourself. We're going to start our journey in Spain, and our novella number one is The Dialogue of the Dogs by Miguel de Cervantes. It's one of his novelas ejemplares, or exemplary stories. And in this story, two dogs realize all of a sudden, for whatever reason, that they have the ability to speak. So they decide to make the best of it. They're like, okay, since we have this ability that we didn't have before, let's tell each other our stories. You will see that the novella most of the time does not focus on plot. It focuses on a situation. It presents a situation, it examines it, and then continues to re-examine it throughout the text. And we have these two dogs, Berganza, who is the speaker, and then Scipion, who is for the most part the listener. What we get through this novella by Cervantes is literally a dog's eye view of the human condition. And the result is at times grotesque, at times philosophical, at times picaresque, at times touching, but it is always hilarious, as you can imagine, because we are literally seeing the human condition through the eyes of a dog here. It is also, among many other things, a meditation on the art of narration, because you have Berganza, who is for the most part the narrator, and then Scipion, who comments on that narration. Sometimes Berganza goes off on a tangent, and Scipion tells him, get back to the story, get back to the story. So we have a meditation here on how to tell stories. The main mode of this novella is satire. So, you know, I was thinking as I read it, I would love to compare The Dialogue of the Dogs to Natsume Soseki's novel I Am a Cat from 1905-1906. This would be fantastic because you have dogs and the cat on the other hand, always looking at the human condition. And then you also have the difference in genre, right? You have the novella and the long novel, episodic novel too. So that would be interesting, I thought. For the second novella that I chose, we're going to travel to France because I have Candide, or Optimism, by Voltaire, a hilarious text at many, many levels. In this story, we have an optimist who keeps running into examples of the cruelty of the world. So it is a very cruel novella in many ways, but also it is fantastic. It's like very, very funny. It is definitely a thesis novella, so look out for that. Voltaire is reacting or responding to the philosophy of Leibniz. So that's something there that we do have to consider when we read Candide. There is no plot here either to speak of, not what we consider plot, what we would normally call plot. You're not going to find that here. In the novella, instead of speaking of plot, I prefer the term dérive, which has this idea of the text being adrift, right? The text is completely free. And as you probably know, if you read Voltaire's Candide, this novel is literally all over the place. He travels to the New World, to Buenos Aires, that sounds familiar, to El Dorado even, and to many places in Europe also. He is all over the place. So we have here a travel narrative also, and as such, Candide is quite episodic, right? So once again, we're not really having a plot here, but a number of episodes. And one thing that you run into, one problem that you may have as a narrator when you have that is, okay, so how do I give unity to this? One of the ways in which Voltaire does that is through a love story. We have the love story of Candide and Cunegonde, and we wonder, are they going to meet in the end? That's what keeps us reading these episodes, right? That's the unifying element, the thread that puts everything together. Throughout the text, you're going to see that there are a lot of references to other philosophers. There's criticism of art. There's criticism of religion, of course. So it really is a good idea to get a version of Candide that gives you a lot of notes so that you can get all these references. I like Voltaire because he makes fun of everything, but he also makes fun of himself. And I think that is a very healthy thing to be able to do. Look out for the character of Pococurante. That's Voltaire himself, and many of his opinions in the text are those of the author himself. Number 3, we're going to stay in France here, is Balzac's The Unknown Masterpiece. This is the story of two painters, Porbius and Poussin, a young Poussin. And what they want to do is they want to see a masterpiece that was done by an artist that they admire named Fraunhofer. We have repetition in this novella, and repetition is something that you can see in many novellas. It's one of the features of the genre. In this particular case, you see it as Fraunhofer continues to expound his theory on art. So it's primarily an idea of aesthetics that we have here. He keeps commenting on a series of works, and that's the repetition of this particular novella. So the novella is a meditation. This particular novella, The Unknown Masterpiece, is a meditation on the nature of visual arts, the nature of visual representation of reality. As many novellas, this one has an ambiguous ending. I'm not going to tell you what the ending is precisely, but I'm going to say this. The question that we have is, at the end of the reading, is Fraunhofer a genius, or is he just completely crazy? And that ambiguous ending is important in the case of the novella because it could also be both, right? Because the novella, what it does is to suggest. It doesn't spell things out for you. It suggests, and you as a reader have to put everything together and to decide. It's a text that continues to echo, right, in your mind. If you want to see an amazing cinematic adaptation or interpretation of The Unknown Masterpiece, look for Jacques Rivette's La Belle Noiseuse. This is a 1991 film. It's 4 hours long, but it's worth every minute of it. And it was inspired directly by this novella by Balzac. Number 4 is Bartleby the Scrivener. It's in the collection The Piazza Tales by Herman Melville. This is a psychological mystery that prefigures the work of Franz Kafka. It was published in 1853, so that is quite an interesting connection that we have between these two authors. And it shows us a man, Bartleby, who is in conflict with his employer. His boss keeps telling him, this needs to be done, would you do this? And he continues to say, I would rather not do it. I mean, imagine what would happen in real life if you did that. You know, every time your boss asks you to do something, I would rather not do it. The subtitle of Bartleby the Scrivener is A Story of Wall Street. So we have here the story of an ordinary man, a bureaucrat. It's somebody that we can connect with. And he is basically challenging pragmatism and the Protestant work ethic, which are two of the tenets of American society. So as I read the story, I kept thinking of Thoreau's phrase or sentence in Walden: "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Bartleby is a perfect illustration of that reality. What we have here is a repetition, the re-examination of this situation. Bartleby refuses to work. We never know why, right? We don't understand why, and we keep reading in the hope that that will be revealed. The novella is not characterized by revelation. Revelation is a concept that I associate mostly with the short story as a genre. Now, in Bartleby, there is a revelation at the end. But when it comes, it only makes you think more about what has happened. It doesn't really solve the mystery, it only deepens it. That is typical of the novella. Bartleby is another excellent example of the genre that I would, suggest to somebody who asks me, okay, what is the novella about? For number 5, we're going to travel to a completely different place. We're going to go to Russia, because I'm looking at Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, which I have in this collection right here from the Modern Library, the best short stories of Dostoevsky. This Notes from Underground is considered to be one of the first existentialist stories or novellas ever written, and as you know, it has been tremendously influential. So many stories, so many novellas are based on it. And in Notes from Underground, we have a man who is 40 years old, and he is reassessing or assessing his life, which he says he has lived underground, right? He is speaking literally and also metaphorically. And this text has 2 parts to it. There is the first part, which deals primarily with what I call theory. So he just tells us what he feels about life and his approach and what his philosophy is. And then the second part of the novel is, centered on what I call practice. He illustrates and gives examples as to why, life is the way he is telling us it is. So his worldview and illustrations of his very, very cynical, brutal worldview. It is a critique of positivism. So the philosophy of positivism is critiqued here. And the character, the narrator, exalts individuality, free will, all of these things. He wants really to be seen as an individual, a true individual. And his conflict throughout the novel, and the novella goes with these 2 ideas, is the conflict between desire and reason. So that's what determines the structure of the Notes from Underground. One of the many conclusions, if you will, that he comes to is that life may be a mess, but if you try to reduce life to a formula, to something that can be studied and dissected, what you do is to take away all the beauty from it. Everything that is wonderful about it, you're just taking it away. And he doesn't like that. He prefers a life that is completely a mess, but that is wonderful, that is amazing, right? To something that can be just put on a table and dissected. This novella is raw, it is unapologetic, and it is also full of psychological insight. So I think it's definitely one of the best novellas ever written. We're going to stay in Russia now, because my next choice, you probably guessed it right now, is The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. In this story from 1886, we have an average man who all of a sudden comes to the realization, the full realization, that he is going to die, right? Look at the title, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Talk about a spoiler, right? Do you think Ivan Ilyich is going to die? Yes, he is, right? I mean, from the very beginning, we know what's going to happen, because the novella, as a genre, is not really about revelation, right? And at the same time, think about it, we have the death of Ivan Ilyich. Okay, a spoiler. Couldn't we say the same thing about life itself? I mean, this is something that we don't really talk about very much, at least not the people that I know, but we all know that this is going to happen in our lives at one point, right? We just kind of put it to the side and we don't focus on it, which is exactly the problem of Ivan Ilyich in this novella. The novella is not about revelation, once again. It's about the re-examination of a given situation. In this case, the fact that every life comes to an end. A fact that Ivan Ilyich comes to realize at the very end. And the theme here is Vanitas vanitatum omnia vanitas. everything is vanity, which is something that Tolstoy himself kind of dealt with or came to deal with at one point in his life. And this is the time at which he wrote this novella. And here we have a double story. We have, on the one hand, Ivan's realization that he is going to die, and on the other hand, we have other people's reaction to Ivan's decline as he deals with this illness and with his final days. As I read it, I was thinking of a phrase from Conrad's Heart of Darkness. At one point, Marlowe, the narrator, says, "We die as we dream alone." So it's something that we have to face by ourselves, right? Nobody can help you. I mean, people can help you, but nobody can walk the road for you. So this is something that the death of Ivan Ilyich touches upon. I'm pretty sure there are cinematic adaptations of it. I'm not familiar with them, but I am familiar with a fantastic and amazing film that deals with the same topic, which is Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru, which means to live. So if you have not seen this movie, check it out. Kurosawa is one of my favorite directors, and this is, I think, one of his masterpieces, if not his best film. I don't know if I would call any film by Kurosawa his best. I cannot do that because I love them all so much, but it's definitely in the top 10 and maybe probably also in the top 5. Number 7, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Sometimes, actually many times, you're going to see that the novella as a genre goes for tension, for the building of tension. And that is exactly what we have in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We re-examine the following situation. Characters keep running into mystery. There's a mystery, they're trying to solve it, but they cannot come to a solution. And that is the, repetition in this novella. We have here a plurality of voices and texts. Okay, so this novella is literally a puzzle that we, the readers, have to put together. And most of you, most people, in general, know the gist of the story. It's a story that has been spoiled. I'm not going to spoil it for you in case you do not know what I'm talking about, but it's just a very, very unfortunate situation with this novella. And it's a great story, both at the literal level and at the allegorical or symbolic level or metaphorical level too. You could read this as an allegory of addiction, for instance, and I'm just giving you one example of the many possibilities when it comes to this. But mainly what we have with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a meditation on the complex nature of personality. That's all I'm going to say here. It really deals with what lies under the mask or the thin veneer of respectability. And keep in mind that this is a Victorian text. It's a Victorian story. So it goes perfectly with what was happening at the time. That's all I'm going to say. The next thing is, as I said before, if you don't know what I'm talking about when I said that the story has been spoiled, please go out, get a copy of the book and read it right now before somebody spoils it for you. Number 8 is one of my favorite texts, which is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And as a matter of fact, the first YouTube video that I made is on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So if you want more details on this novella, I refer you to that very long and in many ways very awkward video, but that I kept there because I'm very, very close to it. This is in a nutshell the story of a captain who recounts a journey that he made into the heart of Africa as a young man. It's a journey that really completely changed his life. It could be read as a doppelganger story, and as you can imagine, there have been many interpretations, Freudian, Jungian, and many more about this text. Basically, the repetition here, the way it happens, is we have Marlowe's reaction to the African reality. And this is a reaction of perplexity. Okay, so that's what repeats itself throughout this novella. What he is recounting is probably the most important moment in his life, which is his meeting with Kurtz in the heart of Africa. You know how in Dante's Divine Comedy, when he goes to the Inferno, the Purgatorio, the Paradiso, he talks to these souls, and the souls tell him basically the moment that was the most important for them. That is exactly what we have with Heart of Darkness also. A man telling you his life-changing event. And there is, in this novella, there is a lot of ambiguity, but there is also one of the forms that takes is literary ambiguity. Is this a critique of colonialism or an apology of it? You decide. The novella gives you the information and you have to decide. It really depends on how you approach the text. It is a very complex text that raises a lot of questions, and that's one of the reasons why it has survived all these years. It has also elicited many literary and cinematic responses, as you know. The novel Things Fall Apart, the novel A Bend in the River, also The Lost Steps, right? And of course the movie Apocalypse Now. So it's really, an immortal text. And that's one of the reasons why it has survived all these years. For number 9, we're going to travel to Germany, because I have for you Death in Venice by Thomas Mann. This recounts a poet's journey to Venice, where he sees in a youth the incarnation of the ideal of classical beauty. That is the main situation that we have. And we have recurring themes, many of them, but one of them is aesthetics. We have meditations on the nature of art. And then towards the end of the novella, we have the theme of disease. At the center of this novella, the character of Aschenbach is really a pathetic figure. And I think there's probably a little bit of self-pity going on here on Thomas Mann's part. The main conflict here is between the artist and bourgeois society. And I believe Death in Venice is meant to be at least a provocative text. But it is also a very good allegory, and I think that is the main reason why it has survived. Not because it's scandalous, though you can certainly read it that way, but because it is also allegorical. Nothing really happens in this text, as in many of the novellas that I just shared with you. It's almost like The Beast in the Jungle by Henry James. Nothing really happens per se. But like Marcel Proust, Mann is primarily a style. So this is a text that you want to read for the mesmerizing prose and the wonderful descriptions. Number 10, The Dead by James Joyce from the collection Dubliners. It's the last text in that collection. And here the narrative element, or whatever you want to call it, is a social gathering, the Miss Morkan's annual dance. Of course, this could be a novel because you have a social gathering. There's a lot of material there. But we keep coming back to the concept of suggestion. The novella presents the information almost in a condensed form, and you, the reader, have to unpack this thing and assemble the story. We have a main leitmotif, which is Gabriel's, the protagonist's, inadequacy. And you can see this through a series of encounters. His conversation with Lily in the beginning, his conversation with Miss Ivors as they are dancing, all building up until he has that encounter with his wife in the end, which is disastrous in many senses. Joyce believed in the concept of epiphany, and he finds transcendence in the everyday, right? In everyday things. His style, at least in Dubliners, continues what I like to call the compassionate realism of Anton Chekhov, which is a tradition that continues to our day, especially in one of my favorite authors, Alice Munro. So look out for that as you read The Dead. The last paragraph of this novella is one of the most memorable paragraphs ever written. It's just a beautiful ending. So, it's something that you have to look forward to when you read The Dead. Number 11, I have The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Probably the perfect example of what the novella is. The story, as you know, of Gregor Samsa, who finds one day he wakes up to find that he has been transformed into a gigantic bug. It's not about plot, once again, it's about how he deals with that situation. One of the things I like about Kafka is that he shows us how to do modern allegory. And modern allegory is not a matching exercise. It has so many meanings. It has a plurality of meanings, and Kafka is just wonderful at doing that. This could be a story about burnout, right? When Gregor realizes that he has been turned into a bug, the first concern that he has is, how am I going to get to work? So that's one way you could interpret it. But it could also be a story about enlightenment, right? About the only sane person in a world gone mad. Imagine that. If you suddenly had a realization of something and you're the only one who has this realization, everybody around you is going to react in an awful way towards you. And this is what happens to Gregor in the story. And the Metamorphosis is both darkly humorous, very humorous in that sense, but it is also devastating. So you have these two things, these two poles right here from which you can, that you can navigate when you read this story. Two things about Kafka that people have mentioned. One is his subjective objectivity. He describes subjective things in a very objective way, so that you come to believe in these things. And also something that Albert Camus pointed out, Kafka almost forces you to reread him. And that is what's wonderful about him. I think that is a very accurate description of the work of Franz Kafka. And we arrive at the end of our journey, number 12. I hope this is a surprise, if the others haven't been. I have The True Story of A.Q. by Lu Xun, a novella from China from the year 1921. This novella explores injustice. That is the main theme right here, and it culminates in a critique of the 1911 revolution. Okay? It begins with the narrator explaining that he is not adequate to tell this story and all the problems he had, so we have an unreliable narrator from the very beginning. And we come to know the character of A.Q. through a series of encounters that he has with people around him. The result is always the same. He never wins. Okay, he is just a born loser. At the same time, we can't say that we feel very sorry for him because he is selfish, obnoxious, opportunistic. He really is a pathetic figure. Now, if that sounds familiar, many of the stories that I have just shared with you have this at their center, a pathetic figure, an anti-hero. And that is not a coincidence. If the novel, the long novel of the 19th century focused on heroes, right? They were epic novels in their length most of the time. Also, the novella focuses on anti-heroes. So it's the anti-epic. As a conclusion, I would like to critique my own list, and I have a question here for myself, which is probably what you have been wondering throughout this presentation. Where are the women, right? That is a flaw in this list. And I realized that my favorite texts by women from this classic period were either poems or novels. I think the novels of Jane Austen, Middlemarch, right, by George Eliot, Jane Eyre, any of these texts are far superior to anything that a man could have written in these days. But and this shows some of my literary blind spots here, I could not find novellas that I had read. Most of the novellas that I love written by female authors are after 1922. So what I thought is I'm going to put together a list very similar to this one that I shared with you, only female authors. Okay, so I promise you that. Another issue is that I try to cover a lot of literatures, a lot of languages, right? A lot of cultures. So some people were left out. Where is Henry James, for instance, one of the masters of the novella? I'm going to remedy that. I'm going to have a list of great Russian novellas, great French novellas, great American novellas. So look out for those. I'm going to make many of these for you to sort of, make up for these faults that the list that I just shared with you has. So that's the end of our journey. I hope you enjoyed this list of 12 classic novellas that everyone should read. Please let me know what you think about it, and if you have any suggestions or any other novellas that you would add, novellas that you would take off the list. I would love to hear your comments on this. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.